This episode of the WP Minute is brought to you by OmniSend. Do you sell stuff online? Then you need to meet OmniSend, the powerful yet refreshingly intuitive email and SMS tool that helps you make $73 for every dollar spent. OmniSend is that good and effective. You probably know the struggles of investing in digital ads with no guarantee it'll bring money back into your pocket. Use OmniSend and you won't have to find creative ways to make your audience notice you. You just talk straight to them. Use OmniSend pop-ups to build a contact list, then send campaigns directly to people who already want to hear from you. Automate everything with OmniSend. Just set it up once, sit back, and watch those sales roll in. If this sounds too good to be true, check it out at omnisend.com. Visit omnisend.com. Tell them thanks for sponsoring the WP Minute. It's an emergency pod, Mark Szymanski. That's what we're doing today, an emergency pod. Never thought I would stoop so low, but here we are.
Emergency.
It's not an emergency. Listen, we're happy to have everybody joining this emergency live pod today. I don't even like the word pod. I rally against that word quite often in the podcasting space, but we're going to just have a discussion because it's fresh in our mind, really. At least it is for me. Watching some live streams this morning, I'll show those in a moment. We're going to talk about the sort of frustrations that a lot of folks have been sharing, not just this year, but for the last 20 years of WordPress and how we've sort of maybe got to this point. And I think that, hey, things are exactly the same as they were a decade ago, 15 years ago, except now, hey, there's more people, there's much more attention on it, and we're really dissecting a lot of the same challenges that we've had for many, many years. So happy to have people join this conversation and happy to be here with you, Mark Szymanski, as always, not just listening to your voicemails, but seeing your wonderful face live on YouTube.
It's always a pleasure, Matt. Thank you so much for having me, as always.
Do you want to tee up while I coordinate this? Do you want to tee up today's live stream that we watched? I'm going to pull it up so we can see it, but Paul Charlton went live today. But can you tee that up for the audience? Let them know what it was that was going down, what the topic was, and what we're going to react to.
Yeah, you know what? I can give maybe some speculative context too around it a little bit. So obviously we have the Bridge Builder series. Matt Eastwood is the head of that with me, Brendan O'Connell, and we had a recent episode that was on Friday with Anne Beauvlet and Max Zeibel, and that was a pretty interesting thing. But the reason I think that's related is because we clipped out a piece of that where Anne was specifically talking about kind of influencers and do we have as influencers and WordPress people like that, people that have audiences, should we kind of talk more about and create kind of dialogue, more kind of the idea of contributing more directly to WordPress rather than just shouting out our opinions into the void and seeing who follows that and stuff like that, which obviously big topic. We'd have to dissect all that. But I feel like maybe this was a little bit kind of related to that. Regardless if it was directly related, it definitely had, the same topic to talk about. So it's just back and forth a little bit on that, and that is what I was really excited to see this live stream day. So I saw it came up in my subscriptions, and Paul WP Toots, for some of you guys that may not know his name, Paul Charlton, put that up there, and it was him, Imran from Web Squadron, Mark Crowell from Wiki Design, and then also Jeffrey at Lightbox, all great content creators. So yeah, it was a really good live stream that they put on, and I know I was watching it, Matt was watching it, a lot of other people were watching it, and we just had a lot of ideas. So that's kind of where we are right now, just kind of giving our thoughts, because this is a very important topic, regardless of your opinion on it. There's a lot of nuance here that needs talked about.
So I threw in the chat for right now the clip from the Bridge Builder series with Anne Beauvlet, and right up on the screen as well, we have Paul Charlton, friend of the show, and Imran from Web Squadron. I've never synced up with him, though I would love to, but they switched the live stream over to his channel because Paul was having some connection issues. It's always going to come off probably in the wrong light that we're doing this and reacting to this video, because obviously I have some strong opinions on some of the answers or some of the commentary in today's. I am obviously a proponent of open source, fan of WordPress. I think everyone generally always throws out the general statement that we're all fans of WordPress and we just want to see it do better. I have a particular angle, as you know, Mark, and a lot of people watching the show. I have this particular angle on what that means to love WordPress, wanted to see it succeed, and to also criticize it. I've been a critic of WordPress for many years, primarily though at the leadership level, not so much the software side of things. Like, yeah, of course, there are things where, hey, I wish this could be better, but I've never been one to be hypercritical of how things are getting done, because while I appreciate designing a good product, I also, as somebody who has developed products before from the product developer standpoint, not the actual punching the code into the into the computer perspective, I appreciate a good product. I appreciate the process, and I can understand why things end up maybe being the way they are. But I'm not a front-end designer. I'm not a JavaScript expert, so I can't debate or give hypercritical feedback on how something is done, or at least I don't feel like I should give that kind of feedback, because I can't do it. Right? So like, I'm not the guy who's going to tell people, hey, it should be, we discussed this with Kevin, it should be whatever, 768 pixels by default. I mean, I'm not the guy to tell you that. I'm just the guy that says this works for me or it doesn't, So that's like my perspective on it. But I highlighted a couple topics from today's discussion. I think you maybe jotted some down. Let me just tell you some of the topics that I pulled, and then we'll jump into them. So I wrote things down from today's live stream. If I can find it, I sent it to you. Here it is. So like open source versus ownership, I want to talk about that today and highlight a post that I've written and highlight one from DHH, from Basecamp, and Ruby on Rails fame. The Automattic apparatus, like it could be a 5-hour episode just talking about the Automattic apparatus. But I do want to talk about that because some of the feedback that I heard in today's live stream is like, I wonder if people understand. I mean, I don't think I fully understand it either, but I feel like I have a strong understanding of how Automattic works. And I want to just highlight some of that today. Contributing and what that means, like time versus payment versus not for me. That's probably the biggest thorn in my side from observing today's live stream, which we'll break apart in a little bit, and prioritizing features. So open source versus ownership, Automattic, the apparatus, contributing versus being paid or versus not for me. And then how do we end up here? Like, how do these features get prioritized? Those are my big four. Did you have some big takeaways today that you want to punch into?
I think that those ones there summarize the big takeaways specifically from the stream really, really well. The one thing I'll say here before we get into all of it is the same thing that I kind of said to you in relation to that, and it's the fact that I consider myself like relatively newer to the actual understanding of how this all works rather than just using WordPress as a tool. And I think that the big thing that I've maybe just the way that I am is like, I like to try to break things down to as fundamental as possible and really understand like the things, like how everything works as I'm trying to learn it. Like I'm asking a lot of questions, right? You and I have had so many conversations. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. I feel like the one thing that we could all do a little bit better is understanding that this is very nuanced and that we kind of all need to get, no matter who we are, like if we're always just getting more educated on how everything works, then we can have a more honest discussion across the board. And I'm not talking about anybody specifically. I'm just saying that's my personal philosophy on it. So that's why I love talking to guys like yourself, because you guys have been in it for a while and you understand the ins and outs of it. And then we can kind of go from there with the conversation. So, but I like these topics. I'm excited to chat about them.
I'm also not, you say that a lot to me, and others have said like, hey, you've been here I'm also of the mindset that, have I been here too long? Yes. Like, do I only see it from a particular angle? Yes. I was just talking in the last episode with Corey Miller on the podcast. And, when I talk to folks like you and others who just don't understand like why maybe let's say WordCamps are the way they are. We came from a time, I guess this is all like pre-COVID, where there were many types of WordPress events that were happening. Pressnomics sort of being like a flagship business-focused WordPress event that happened, was a company I worked at, Pagely, and that happened for many years. That was like the thing. Like so many people were hyped to go to that because it was very business-focused and a lot of deals got done, and you just saw the business side of WordPress. LoopComp for developers. Like there was a time where these like other events were happening. So when folks come into the community like you, like in a post-COVID world where they're kind of like trying to figure out events again, you're like, why doesn't this exist? And maybe for like the old folks in the group where it's like, oh yeah, we had that at one time and we're forgetting to like relay that to you or to like understand, we need that back. Like we need these types of things back. So it's sort of like, the waves have crashed on the shore and they're pulling away. Like, oh yeah, at one time we had all that and now it doesn't exist. Let's get this stuff going for folks. let's talk about this WordPress open source ownership thing. I think this is a great post, and I should probably pull up my own site as well. That way we have that. I wrote a post a couple weeks ago called "What Would We Do with the Keys to the Kingdom?" And I referenced, this is the post, "What would we do with the keys to the kingdom?" I'll throw that in chat as well. And I referenced this post by David Hansen from Henmeyer Hansen from Basecamp, again, started Ruby on Rails open source project. And he writes, open source is neither a community nor a democracy. I'm not going to obviously read the whole post here, but I implore folks to go ahead and read this. This is something that I think is very true and is what triggered me to say, what would we do with the keys to the kingdom if we had it? Like, a lot of us air our grievances online and on live streams like this and podcasts and blogs and Twitter threads. Well, what would we really do if we were the ones in control? I don't think it would be any better. In fact, I would probably guess it would be worse, because as David points out, like, there needs to be somebody who's getting it done, getting the job done, setting the direction, and sort of that's the person, that's the leader of the project. And in our case, it's Mullenweg. And I don't think, and I fully stand behind that as the decision. There are things I don't like about it, but I still fully stand behind that decision because I still have enough confidence in his ability to do this with, the criticisms that I would still give along the way. This is a fantastic piece. I think everyone should read this, because what it's saying is like, you don't own it. Like, we don't own this. That's the thing. Like, it's open source, and we can kind of fall into this gray area where we're like, oh my God, like, this is ours. We all have this say, but we don't in the fundamental direction of where the project is going. We can have say on little things that happen along the way. Again, I talked about this last week. I think it was you live when we got our little feature put into WordPress 6.6. Perfect example. We showed up. We said something. We made a post on GitHub, an issue. People developed it. It went in. We got credit. Like, that's awesome. That's the cool thing about open source, and you can make these changes. Massive fundamental direction. We're probably going to have less of a chance to have that opportunity for us because we're not in control. Open source doesn't mean we own it. We can just partake in it. That's just my particular view. I'd love to have your thoughts on that, Mark, if you have something else.
Yeah, for sure. So I hadn't ever seen that article, and I know we were talking about it last week, and you sent that to me. I would highly recommend, if you guys haven't read that article from DHH. It was great stuff. I think the thing that it pointed out to me, because again, I'm trying to navigate this space and understand like where everybody's like kind of mentally at with a lot of this. I do think there absolutely, just across the board, again, to differing degrees, definitely some misunderstanding between like what open source is and what that actually means. From my understanding, currently where I'm at, from my framework, is open source doesn't mean anything really about the community per se. It's much more about like the licensing of the software. So like GPL version 2. I was actually looking it up today because I'm trying to wrap my head around this too. Like, when something says it's open source, it's just meaning like the software licensing, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. So it's like anyone can see the code, they can reuse the code, they can fork the code, whatever. But ultimately, there's more to it than that. But I'm saying it doesn't inherently mean that you own it as like a community member. It probably doesn't even really mean that you're entitled to an opinion or your feature set per se. Like it not inherently. So then that's where all these other things come into play, and it's like everybody uses WordPress and they hear the word open source and they kind of sounds like a little bit misled to the fact that like, oh, you can just basically just scream what you want to happen and then it can happen. I contradict that slightly though with the fact that I don't think that would be like a bad thing, but it doesn't seem like that's inherently the way that it operates. So again, this is just kind of me trying to think of like, okay, how is it actually work? And then is there a way to make it better or something like that? But I think the bottom line is, again, the open source side of things, I think that word and that terminology and the way that it's thrown around sometimes I think it's just a slight misunderstanding perhaps from what I've seen here, because I don't know, I'm still navigating myself, like I said, but that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. And I totally understand, because I get caught up in that as well. Sorry, I'm just playing with I turn my gain instead of my volume. I get caught up in that as well, because I feel like I love it too, and I feel like I want this ownership. And WordPress is in an interesting spot because unlike, let's say, Ruby on Rails, which is what DHH is mostly referring to, like he built, I don't even know what the technical term is. He built that coding framework, that code base to make his own products. And the byproduct was, oh, this is now open source. You too can go build your own products like I'm doing over here with Basecamp, right? So he built like this, what I'll call like the engine of Basecamp back in the day to help him build that product. And oh, by the way, I'm open sourcing this so you can do that too. WordPress, on the other hand, was created open source, and then Automattic was built to help sell the dream of WordPress, and they're the same exact products. So it's very hard to get yourself away, like pull yourself away from that and say, oh, this is mine because I can do it on any website. I can build it, I can make it, it's all mine. But really, it's not. The GPL and open source affords you to go ahead and do other things, but like the overall direction of where this is going is not ours. And I think it's high time that we understand that, be okay with it, because I've said this a million times, I don't want to get into it now, but I think Automattic needs to survive in order to be the best steward of open source WordPress.
I think we need to dig into that though for a second. I don't know where you're gonna.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, we'll dig into that.
Okay.
So let's just talk about Automattic, the apparatus, because one of the things that came up in that conversation was, oh, Automattic has like $900 million. What are they doing with all that money? And this is where I have like a fundamental difference in like content creators. And I don't want this to come off as like super disrespectful, but it's like, if you're going to criticize us, try to understand as much as possible of where all of the chips lie in this game of Automattic and open source. Let me pull up Automattic's website, and then we can share this. And this is great information for anybody who's never really, taken a look at this stuff. Don't forget, been living and breathing this stuff for a while now, so I can understand how it can get overwhelming. So let's just take a look at this page. This is Automattic's homepage. Here are all the products that they have listed here, which I don't even, podcast. So WordPress.com, Beeper, Tumblr, Day One, WooCommerce, Jetpack, WordPress VIP, which is enterprise level hosting if you've never run across that before. Pocket Cast, which is a podcast listening app. Akismet, which is the spam protection product that they launched many, many years ago. Longreads, Newspack, Gravatar, and then they also contribute WordPress.org, and then all these other open source initiatives: WordPress for iOS, WordPress for Android, P2, BuddyPress, BBPress, WordCamp, WP Job Manager, 5 for the future, right? So that's just Automattic, like the core products. And then Automattic is also investing and purchasing other companies. They had invested in Castos, which is a company that I worked at before. InstaWP, they've done seed round investments in. Other WordPress hosting companies, they've done investments in. This is like that traditional VC world that maybe folks aren't just acquainted to, but it's not just, hey, they're giving money to Automattic to just do WordPress. It's all the things at Automattic where that money goes, right? 2,000-ish people work at that company. If we just take a look at Crunchbase, which is some of this data now is locked behind a payment wall. But recently in the WP Product Talk interview with Mullenweg, they were talking about the size of the company. He's just over 2,000-ish people now at Automattic. And their recent funding round came from, where they hide it now. Let's see. So the last one, it says 2021. Automattic was funded by 30 investors, Avant Global and BlackRock being the most recent investors. BlackRock should raise some eyebrows, of course, for some people. Automattic has made 19 investments. The most recent was last year, Liquid AI. In their recent acquisition of Beeper, $125 million. That's a messaging app, and looks like they're getting more into the messaging game. This is the point I'm trying to make here: is 2,000 people. If you've ever worked in an organization with 100 people, let alone 2,000 people, it is extremely difficult to move things forward. I'm not saying that this is the right thing. I'm just saying, like, this is what happens when you have an organization that grows this large, who's also trying to build a profitable company. If you look at somebody like GoDaddy, publicly traded company, I think Automattic roughly valued at $7 billion from blog posts and stuff that you see. But you look at somebody like a GoDaddy and you start to see their profitability, their market cap, their amount of employees, and you're like, well, boy, they're also profiting off the back of WordPress. Why don't they do more? And they do a lot in the community, but this is where that frustration grows at the sort of enterprise and big level, whereas Automattic isn't bad just because it's getting a lot of money. There's a lot of other companies with a lot more money also profiting off of WordPress, who should also fall under scrutiny and contribute back to WordPress as well. So I just have a fundamental issue when it's like, they've got all this money, why aren't they making WordPress better? Because look at all the stuff that they're doing, and it's not 2,000 people just making WordPress better, right? Of those 2,000 people, I don't know, how many people are in administrative, right? 200 people, 10% of the company are in HR, comms, like all this other stuff, legal. Then you have a executive team, and then you have support staff, and then you have the product managers and marketers and SEO people. Like, it's a big company, and they're not all just pouring their resources into WordPress. Does that make sense to you, Mark?
I mean, it definitely does make sense, and I hear where you're coming from with the number thing. Yeah, it definitely, 900 million. I'm sure that doesn't obviously all go to like the WordPress project because Automattic raised that. I mean, that makes sense totally on paper. I mean, but again, like I feel like I always just try to ask questions, and then the next question I would have is, okay, who is? I want to know exactly as good of data as we have, which I know we do have some. I'm sure we could like find some or whatever on the actual WordPress project stuff. But like I've seen those graphs of like, okay, Automattic is like the biggest chunk of supporters, like people writing code, and then like GoDaddy is in there, or 10up is in there, people contributing to actual WordPress. So one of my questions is, I know half the answer to it, but one of my questions is, okay, who is actually contributing to WordPress? So for instance, when anybody goes on the internet and says, hey, this sucks about WordPress, like this feature, this UI, UX, whatever, like I don't like this. Who is that specifically? Who made that decision to put that in there, or to change something or whatever? So like, how does that actually work? Because I feel like that's a big problem where, in private companies, you don't, or, public, but like, actual corporations, like you don't really have that full clarity, but maybe you'll have like some sort of like a leadership type chart and things like that, and you'll be able to kind of like decipher some things or whatever. But like ultimately you're just yelling at Apple, for instance. Oh, they changed something. Oh, we hate Apple. So with WordPress, I feel like it ends up just being kind of the same way, even though it doesn't operate the exact same way. I want to say, like, because there's just seemingly people getting paid from Automattic, there's people getting paid at 10up, there's people getting paid at GoDaddy to sponsor a certain amount of hours to this project, right? And then I don't know I don't know the answer here, but there's also free labor, right? That is contributing to it. So that screws with people as well, like just mentally, which totally makes sense. It's like, who is like contributing for free? Like, how does that work? And then you have conversations like we'll probably get into, like, well, why would I contribute? Regardless of code, why would I contribute in GitHub or Slack or wherever for free? Because people are making money from me doing this. And then the rebuttal to that is like, well, you contributing is how the open source project continues to flow forward. So it's kind of like you are helping yourself, even though you're not getting paid. There's I just expressed a lot of different things there. But I'm telling you, like, this is from like, we'll call it like more boots on the ground type thing. I'm in the comments. I'm in making content. I'm watching other people's streams. I'm on Twitter. These are the types of questions that people just don't know the answers to. And it's not really their fault because it's so goddamn nuanced that it's so difficult. Like, I've spent the last 12 months of my life trying to figure this out, and I consider myself to be kind of this mindset where I can dive in and deal with this and try to figure it out and try to piece it out. And one of my goals is to hopefully come out on the other side and be like, hey, this is really nuanced, but here's like a crash course, because I haven't seen anything like that. I wish something like that would exist. So yeah. I don't know.
So I think, once again, like understanding the value of open source and what we have. So in my post, what would you do with the keys of the kingdom? I say, look, it's totally fine to be a critic, to be critical. Obviously, if you're not bashing people, I think everybody says that. And everyone says, yes, I love WordPress. But what you have to just understand is where the value of open source gives you the ability to build your own business on the back of WordPress is quite powerful and also very understated I think it came up in Paul's live stream today where somebody said, well, what would happen if it was 5? I don't think you wouldn't get this kind of amplification for WordPress, and it certainly would not have grown this large for obvious reasons if it wasn't open source, and you won't be able to do that with another platform. Like, you simply can't do it with a commercial Wix, Squarespace, Webflow, because those are all hosted things, and there's no portability there. It's just off the table. So you have to be able to say, I value that ability for me to just take this, start a business, replicate it with as many sites as I want without being taxed, right?
Is there a way? Can I throw a monkey wrench in here for just a quick second, though? Because you have said this many times to me, and while I don't disagree with it, I do think that this is kind of where we talk about the current gen versus the next gen and stuff like that. Like, from what I see, and I'm not saying I don't have data per se, but from what I see, people are becoming more and more and more casual and carefree about like losing control of their data. And I don't know if that is like something that can be stopped. So, we don't need to go down a rabbit hole here. All I'm saying is, like, when you make the claim of this is open source and you're not going to have the same impact with something that's not open source. I'm not saying that I want that to happen. I'm just saying that, like, people are so quick to just give up their shit nowadays that like they don't even think like these, like, and again, I'm not trying to judge these people. I'm making observations. They watch a Wix ad and they're like, this is fantastic, super easy. I'm just gonna jump on there and use it. Like, they don't even think twice about, like, where is this data? What's going to happen if these people jack up my rates? What's going to happen if, like, I say something and they kick me off here? Like, they don't think about any of that until it happens. So, and if those things continue to happen, maybe people will care more. But I'm saying, like, I mean, the phones that we have and the different things, like, I mean, we're the phones is a great example because we have Apple and we have Google, basically. And then we have, like, these other types of phones where it's like, oh, you don't have, not connected to the internet or whatever. So I'm not trying to get off topic here, but I'm saying that I wouldn't just, like, make it seem like this is always going to be the case, because it doesn't seem like it's even trending in that direction. It seems like it's trending away from that.
Yeah, open source isn't just about, oh, this is my data. Like, that's not the argument for open source and data. And in fact, like, what data do I actually have on my website? When people just think of data, right? I immediately go to, well, every single one of my credit cards have been compromised by them. AT&T was, and they sent out an email, and they're like, here's how you can protect it moving forward. How about you protect my data? You're like, why are you yelling at me and telling me not to answer phone calls from marked as spam? You're the one that got breached. So there's data, like your customer data, your customer identifying information. And in WordPress, I think people kind of throw that around. It's certainly about the content in your WordPress site. And for me, it's much more of that, like, technical reason is I can be portable with it. I can take that content from one web host to another web host, or I can extract it or archive it how and when I want. And I can manipulate that, right? So yes, WordPress allows you to do that. And yes, WordPress is open source. So I think that the argument is for open source for the reason that we're going to jump into, right now. And one of the things, let me just share the screen again. One of the things that come up, and I'm going to try to zoom in and do this so that it's as easily readable as possible. I'm trying to do it with two hands here. Hold on one second. So zoom in. So this is the Gutenberg GitHub repo. WordPress doesn't operate, and either Zach or Brian, if you're in there, none of the comments for WordPress core are in GitHub. That is all in Track and WordPress legacy, like SVN. That's a whole other stream that we can go into. But if we look at just Gutenberg, because they are using GitHub for all of the communication here, this is the other value of open source, right? Is that we can actually see it and see this stuff being developed, right? Sure, are things happening behind the scenes that are not being, documented? They're in Slack. The conversations are happening in Slack. Absolutely. Do I think it's nefarious? No, it's just the way of life, right? It's like you have conversations with, if you're at a job and you have a meeting with somebody, you're talking to them in Zoom or in person, that stuff isn't documented. Things happen, right? So what this open source project allows us is to see this stuff happen, and we can analyze it and also comment on it and see it in real time. So when people say, why did they do that? we can see it right here in something like GitHub, especially for the Gutenberg project. So that's what this open source project affords us. It affords us that visibility. This is also a hat tip to version control. Mark, you and I talk about this a lot. This is all done in GitHub, a version control type of tool, so that we can go back and see everything that's happened over the course of all of their releases, tie it back to a particular thing. So add example for query block and post list. This is the issue where it all sort of stemmed from. You can now click that and say, why did they do that? And you can see it was started by a particular person. I don't know exactly what this is, add example for query block and post list, but as an example, you can see what the thing was, why it exists, should exist, how it's going to get done, examples, so on and so forth. And you can track the whole thing and see it all come together on GitHub. If we go
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I just had kind of like a moment here where I like pieced a bunch of things together. There's a general sentiment that, not backed by data, but there's a general sentiment that like GitHub and the Slack, that whole situation, which again, difficult to manage something of this size, but GitHub and Slack and like in Track, I don't know what Track is, but like I haven't gotten there yet, but like all these different things to like manage this open source project, people have said, and we have seen examples of this on Twitter and stuff like that, or X or whatever, like to say like, oh, the code base is getting kind of like, it's hard to jump in. It's hard to like understand different things like that. It's hard to get involved and all that sort of stuff, because I mean, there's probably a reasonable amount of people that have never used GitHub or don't use it like frequently enough to understand kind of what's going on there. I'm not saying it shouldn't be hard or whatever, but like there's a general sentiment there. I feel like that it is hard to get involved or people don't know where to start. I have personally educated people after I learned from guys like you how to go, where to go, things like that. So I think we're moving in the right direction there, but it is kind of difficult there. I don't have an answer for that. But I want to reference that article that you made and you had me read from DHH, where he mentions in there, it's not a democracy, it's not like a community, it's more of like there's a level of elitism, and it's not in a bad way, the elitism, but it's like a level of elitism. I relate that in this case to like, you have to understand how to use these tools. You have to understand the language that's going on. You have to understand the way to get involved and actually impact and do something if you want, which is interesting to me because you juxtapose that with the idea of democratizing publishing, which the tool itself actually does, but utilize or moving it forward is not, those things are disjointed from one another, which again, I'm not saying is a bad thing, but it is the reality of the situation. So it's just kind of a weird spot where like, if you and I weren't having this conversation for the last 12 months, like there's no way anybody would understand that whole juxtaposition of all that.
Yeah,
because it's way too nuanced.
Well, yeah, but it's also, I don't know, unfortunate is the right word, but it's the unfortunate sort of messiness to this where the tool itself is democratizing publishing, and then the open source initiative, WordPress thriving, getting people to contribute, 5 for the future. And then some of those, I guess sometimes that those two statements can get conflated or mixed together. So folks feel like, well, I thought we were democratizing building this thing. No. The tool itself will help us democratize publishing. But what we're doing is building this in an open source fashion. So let's just take a look at Gutenberg as an example. This is the graph. And listen, I'm not a developer, but I can try to understand the highway of how we're all connected here. This is the stats from the repo from 2016 to 2024 when Gutenberg project first started. Again, it's a standalone project and plugin that exists outside of WordPress, and for many reasons. But one of the reasons is Matt Mullenweg thinks that this project will be bigger and more adopted potentially than WordPress itself. Like Wix could one day be like, oh yeah, that Gutenberg thing is good. Let's bring it and adopt it into Wix. And then therefore they would be giving back to the Gutenberg project, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just for those that might not know, Gutenberg stands separate in its own separate plugin. So if you ever want the more advanced features that are being developed, like this is being developed and enhanced outside of WordPress core, right? So there's all the features that are happening in Gutenberg, and then there's all the features happening in WordPress. And when a WordPress point release comes together, they take whatever, the last 5 or 6 releases from Gutenberg itself and bring it into the core release, right? That's a 50,000 foot view of this. But back to the main point here is when you say who is making these decisions, you can go in and look at all the top contributors in this screen here on GitHub, and you can see everybody. Now, I'm not going to punch into everyone here, but if we discount this chap here who hasn't contributed since roughly middle of 2020, the top 10 contributors, not counting this person, out of the top 10 contributors, 8 of them are from Automattic. 2 of them, one is from GoDaddy. Let's see if I can see him. If you just hover over folks' names, it depends if they filled out their profile, but you can see if they're getting paid from Automattic, or if they work for Automattic. It's not like it says we get paid by Automattic. I think this is the person right here. Yeah. So this is actually the chap that helped Brian put our little feature together at the end. He gets sponsored by Loose Inc., Loos Inc. So he's not Automattic. And there's one other person here on the list from GoDaddy. The rest here are Automattic, but that's just the top 10. And then you can go back and see, like, okay, who are all these other folks getting, contributing to Gutenberg, right? So if we go and we look at this person, it may or may not say it. Yep. So at Automattic, he works at Automattic. And that's the other thing that this open source world affords us, is we can kind of see who's putting this all together and who's making the decisions here. And at least easily here with the Gutenberg thing. So when folks are like, oh yeah, I wish it had this feature, I wish it had that feature, and then you look at Automattic, this is going back to the bigger issue, is you look at Automattic and they go, why are they making these decisions? They have all this money. Because this is just one sliver of a project that Automattic is paying people to contribute to, which basically helps us. Whether you like Gutenberg or not, and you don't think it's moving fast enough, all that work is contributing back to us and our customers and our friends and our clients who use this stuff, hopefully getting better and iterating better year after year. They're the one footing the most amount of payroll out of those 2,000 people and millions of dollars that they have. They're the ones contributing the most to WordPress. What does that lead to? That leads to that sort of elitism and control and direction, that you can or cannot agree with. Totally up to you on whether or not, you want to. But this is where, when you're saying who's doing it, you can kind of come and see it right here. Back to the issue I had on the stream is, when I'm frustrated too. And actually I thought about doing it. I'm not going to do it today on today's live stream, but this is a frustration that Paul brought up, that I've brought up, and many other people have brought up before. Is like, why are all these other settings behind the 3 dots, right? The 3 dots, the infamous 3 dots. Why can't I just expose that forever? Well, how would you do it? You would come here to, let's say, Gutenberg, because I would believe that would fall under a Gutenberg issue. And you would open a ticket just like I opened a ticket about putting the command in the command palette for getting to template parts. You too could come in here and say, I want that 3 dots to be exposed every time I go into a WordPress site. I don't want to have to do it every single time. I agree. How do you make that presentation? How do you propose that? You come here, you make the issue, and you start writing the proposal. But you can't just be like, I just want this thing, yell it into the void and then hope it gets done. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so if you really want it, come here, open an issue, and then you'll see how software is really made, because there's just one set of vocal people like you, me, and others who get this stuff. But WordPress is being used by so many other people that it's not just for us. And I think that's what that folks who are so vocal about this need to realize.
Got it. That totally makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think, as a content creator, obviously we get wrapped up sometimes in like making the content for our audience who is, supporting us, but, we don't really have any power if we're not like going in and doing this stuff. It's amazing. I think it was Brendan. I was talking to him today, and it's pretty incredible that we do have the opportunity to do this. We can't go into the GitHubs of, other big stuff, big players or Wixes or whatever, and do that sort of thing. So it is definitely something I should do a lot more. And I think that I just may, if I actually see something that I disagree with. Like, I think that 3 dot thing is like a great example. I mean, just the question that I would have in response to that, though, is how are these decisions getting made initially, though? Like I think, okay, here's the perspective that I get from some people. How did it get to this point where like so many people, even like supporters, think that there's so many weird things about a platform? And again, I'm not going to say that I sit here and use Gutenberg every day. I don't, okay? But I'm saying that like you get that from people that are actually in there often, and they're like, and then people that are exploring it often from a deeper base, not just the UI, but like the code and like the way it interacts with other third-party tools and things like that. And it's like, how did it get to that level? Is it literally just, if you go in there and just have a suggestion, like what's the actual process for making that happen? You know, like who's the end decider of like if the command palette should have the template part thing show up in it? That seems like a pretty straightforward one. But like that would be my next line of thinking, is because I think that is definitely something that people have said as well. It's like, well, they're doing a cost benefit analysis in their head. They're like, okay, well, I can make content, I could talk about some stuff, I could talk about all these different things. Okay, I know that is working to some extent. I know that that's resonating with people. I know that people are, you know, appreciating that content. It's thought provoking. Okay, so then when somebody comes to me and they say, hey, you know, you should really go into the GitHub and write all this stuff up and do all these different things to make sure that these actually get pushed in. Fair thing, fair point. But then they're like, okay, well, I'm not getting paid by, you know, I'm not getting paid to sponsored to produce any of this content or contribute or anything like that. We already had that discussion. It's a fair point, but there's definitely counters to that. But then the question becomes, if they like, are there people like putting stuff in, like putting a bunch of, is there somebody, this is super straightforward question. Is there somebody in like deep in the contributor aspect of Gutenberg that has put in like 100 issues and none of them have ever gotten taken up? So like, you see what I'm saying? Like that's like, why am I even going to do that? I'm playing devil's advocate here. Why would I even like put anything in there if it's not going to even get like seen? Because then I could absolutely see a case where like you have people put stuff in there and their reputation has already preceded them, and then they're not going to get the stuff. This stuff isn't going to get taken up anyway. That's not a reason to not do it, because I think 3 steps ahead. If you actually did that and put that in there and then it didn't get taken up, now you make a video and you say, guys, I told them to do this and they didn't do it.
Yeah.
So that's actually a brilliant plan.
Yeah, and that's 100%, and that's why punching into that one specific issue that I have with the live stream today, like the only hard criticism I have against the guys that hosted that panel today was the fact that it was like, it's not my job to do this. I'm not going to, you know, go in and do that. I don't have time for that. Well, man, if you're in this, living and breathing it and making a living off of creating content for WordPress and you don't have the time, I don't think many people in the audience are going to have the time or the care or the understanding to really, you know, follow this through, right? They said something, oh, 500 people watching this, maybe 50 people go and do something. I doubt it. If you're not going to do it and you're representing a fact that you won't do it, then I don't think anyone in your audience is going to do it. But 100%, this is when I had the same thing with the conversation with Kevin, you have to be able to meet in the middle and be like, okay, I'll spend time on your side and you spend time on my side, because the same thing's happening on the Automattic side and the contributor side. They're saying, I'm not going to watch, there's so many videos. How am I going to watch an hour-long video of these people? Right? They're just going to say the same thing. Sorry, I left that comment on. So there needs to be some participation, and you and I are seeing that, and other folks who are on the live stream right now are seeing this from Automattic with like Ann McCarthy trying to reach out to YouTube creators and sort of extending that olive branch from Automattic. I'm seeing it too from like the media core side, trying to get more sort of organized content and information out to content creators. So it's slowly happening. I think people are just really upset about the velocity and just simply can't understand why it takes so long because of the size of this apparatus that we have in front of us. It's just going to take time, and I don't know any other way around it. How do these things get decided on? Hey, even I'm not 100% sure, and I love anybody in the audience like Courtney. I saw you jump in. I don't even know how all of the decisions are made, and I think that that's largely what everyone has an issue with. But you have the core vision of the phases that Mullenweg spelled out many years ago. We're on the 3rd phase, right? I think 4th phase, 3rd phase of the Gutenberg project, and he sets the general tone and direction. It's him, right? That's why he is still a lead contributor here in WordPress, even though I don't even know if he's writing lines of code being contributed to it. He's just the guy who's leading that direction. And again, I don't have any problem with it as long as somebody's leading it, right? Somebody needs to lead it and have a vision. Then there are, I forgot, my screen's not up, 1 second. And then there are things like this that happen. I don't know 100% how people this. I just randomly search on Make WordPress for the word proposal, because these are how things can happen, starting at the, let's say, WordPress.org and Make level. People will do proposals to have things happen on either the WordPress.org site and for the team around it. So that's just one other column of how this happens. People write out a proposal, they put the idea out, and people talk about it. And then eventually something happens. And whether that whole conversation happens here in these comments, in this little comment section, and eventually it leads into something changing, or there's a Slack group that's happening and people are chatting there, and then it makes its way into the project. Yes, this is where like that disjointedness happens, where there's so many different pockets of communication, but at least there's pockets of communication happening and it's all out mostly in the open. So there's just many areas that impact WordPress, and these conversations are happening all over the place.
Do you want to put that link in the chat? Because like this is an example.
This is just an example. I just searched for the word proposal.
I got you.
Yeah,
I got you. But apparently, I've seen that before, like proposals with other things and stuff like that. So like, can we use this as a quick example though? Just I don't want to put Javier on blast here, because I'm sure he's a fantastic
let me read Courtney's comment. And the other open source project proposals have a formal process with that community's designated people, like core committers, have a period of RFCs, requests for comments. WordPress doesn't have this.
There you go. Okay, that kind of answers my question. So like this, like a proposal like this for whatever from anybody happens. And then it's like, a random person, would jump in here and read it. And I would say, okay, I kind of agree with it, kind of don't agree with it. This is a great idea. This is a stupid idea, whatever it is. Maybe voice my opinion there. But then what happens next? Because it's not like, this isn't supposed to be democratic, right? Like, let me pose some scenarios here, because this is how I learned to understand things. So we have whoever puts a proposal in here. And then underneath this, we could have 55 people that say, this is the worst idea I've ever heard. And then, then though, because this isn't like democratic driven by the people, could we have whoever the like, what happens next? Like, what if is there somebody that like kind of monitors these and says, nope, actually, I disagree with you 55 people. This is a fantastic idea. We're doing it. Can it work like that? Or am I'm just guessing. I don't know, because I'm really confused on how this part works. We don't have a process for that?
For this particular, I would imagine for this particular thing, I guess it also depends on it. Is it something that's impacting WordPress.org, like the site, which is this particular post about having a WordPress hosting directory? But the software can and could happen without, this official proposal. Yeah. Daniel says, this is the same discussion we keep having, going all the way back to WordPress and the foundation, how decisions are being made 100%.
Courtney said I'm correct. I trust Courtney.
Mark says, yeah, Mark, you're correct. Tonic, loads of discussion, zero real leadership. The only thing I have an issue is when you say like, the leadership, is it about you don't like the leadership, or is it things aren't happening fast enough? Because once again, I've been in the software world for a long time, and either, I work at Gravity Forms. That's my day job. There are things that just have to get done, and then there are nice to have features. And then when the things that have to get done are either complex, or we're trying to support WordPress or certain WordPress features, and it has to be backwards compatibility, and you're wrestling with that. Like, man, sometimes the software thing takes a while. And I said this in your live stream last week, Mark. Like, imagine when we were talking about version control, like imagine trying to do WordPress with 2,000-ish people, and then imagine trying to develop a website with 6 people, right? And just like how drastic of a difference it is with 2,000, but also like how it can be the same kind of technical challenge with just 6 people. Looks like we lost Mark's video. Mark is back.
Yeah, just fixing it. Sorry about that. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very interesting thing. But this is the type of stuff here where like the way I work and I think about these types of issues is like, I'm not even at the point where I can like render a full opinion on if this is right, if this is wrong, because what we just discovered there as an example, I guarantee you most people don't even know that. I guarantee you most people don't even know that that's how it works, where like you could put up a proposal for an instance, and then we're still not even sure if like how that gets vetted, if there is a process. Sounds like there kind of isn't one. You can render your opinion on it, but then we don't know how that ends up circulating through. compare and contrast that with maybe something like at another type of company, another corporation, where like you could just put in feature requests and maybe it gets cared about, maybe it doesn't. But ultimately though, the thing there is like, if I went to Apple, and somehow Apple's a bad example, but if I went to a company like that, put in a feature request and 10,000 people upvoted it, I think they're going to be like, wow, a reasonable percentage of our user base thinks this is a good idea. Let's look at it a little bit. And then they might implement it just because most of the user base agrees and they want to make more money. They want to make their clients more happy. So that's the way that I would kind of think about it. But again, here's my thing. I'm not even rendering an opinion on whether I think this is right or wrong. We just need to understand, hopefully the majority of people need to understand how it's working before we even say if it's, okay, this is good, bad, or like, is there a way to make things kind of more efficient? Like, do we have a way to optimize things, or opinions on how to optimize things? Can't even really do that because it seems like there's a lot of minutia here that needs to be still understood by the masses.
One of the comments I saw from Tonic, and we all say it. I think there's different levels of, just trying to pull up something else.
Yeah, guys, Apple was a bad example. Let's pick somebody else. Sorry.
Hold on one second. Let me just pull this up. So, like, it's been so long. I really have an issue with how long, like, being super critical on how long it takes, because we all know, like, for instance, in that live stream today, somebody mentioned like, oh, as soon as I have an idea for Croco blocks, I send them a message and they build it. Well, okay, great. But that's like Croco blocks building it for their however many customers they have, 10,000, 100,000. I don't know what the number is, but it's certainly not millions. And it's certainly not a complex product or a piece of software as WordPress is. So it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, I need that thing, throw it in. Just like with the expand 3 dots on the entire admin panel. How would you get that done? How would you do that? And let's say you can propose it to Gutenberg. What is enough? So if we use your example before, Mark, about like, oh, we tell people to go and create an issue, and then if it doesn't get done for 5 years, like there was an issue recently, somebody brought up again, has been in there for like 13 years, right? But if somebody puts an issue in and it doesn't get touched, like, well, how much effort did you put in to creating that issue, right? Did you clearly articulate it? Is it a big enough issue for somebody to pick up on it? Is it easily solvable, right? So when I put my issue in for putting in a command into the command palette, I was lucky enough to have Brian Cords be like, I think I can do that and write that code, and I will go and do it. So immediately, it was like a 1-2 combo of like, here's my idea, here's why I think I need it. So I articulated it halfway decent. It's a very simple thing, so it's not that hard. And then Brian wrote it, and then got feedback from other developers who contribute to Gutenberg and moved it up the chain. So it's one thing to be like, go and create an issue and just be like, this thing needs help, and then you just leave. But it's another thing to come in and say, okay, we need those 3 dots expanded. I think the best place for that is in the site editor preferences, because this is what I was thinking when I was listening to it. And it would be a toggle inside the site preferences window. And I would even make a little screenshot of like, here's where it can go. Here's a little toggle UI, and you could turn this on and off. But that just starts the discussion, right, for a thing like that. Because it's one thing to just say it. It's another thing to implement it. And that's the difference between like, I don't know, a user base of Croco blocks versus WordPress. Croco blocks may be like, yeah, throw it in. Easy, right? We're only supporting 10,000, I don't mean this in a bad way. We're only supporting 10,000 paying customers or whatever the number is, versus millions of people have to use this, and then it has to be supported, right? So there's a big difference. I hope people realize like you can show up and create that issue, but then what's a good issue versus a bad issue? Does that make sense?
I think it does. How do you feel about filming a video on the 3 dots, posting that on YouTube, then posting that video on GitHub as well?
Sure. Yeah, 100%.
And then seeing how that goes, and then posting a follow-up video on what the outcome was.
Yeah. I mean, the more you can give to a developer or a product person to see that, the better, right? I think when you look at it from, political is not the right word, but when you look at like trying to convince somebody, it's certainly not going to help if you just yell at them and say, this feature is terrible. We need it to be something different. please explain, elaborate, and if you can, demonstrate it with a video and an illustration. Where was I going? I was going with, we're looking at Gutenberg. Oh, WordPress core contributors, right? So there's core contributors to WordPress. So this is across the lifespan of WordPress, and these are folks who actually had core contributor access to WordPress, like those that can actually push the code to WordPress core. And you can come in, you can see all of them throughout the history of WordPress. Let me go back so I can see that number. The number is 72 total contributors, core contributors, right? Folks who can actually push code to WordPress core, which impacts the entire world. That's why that number isn't as big as something like Gutenberg, which has 1,300-ish people over time, 1,100 contributors over time, because this is a project on GitHub that anybody can come and contribute to, right? So
so there's 72 active core contributors?
No, you'd have to go. No, that's overall time.
Really?
Yeah. People who
can you leave?
What do you mean?
Like, can you leave? Has there always been 72 total? Like,
no. These are so it's people that can actually deploy the code, right? These are core contributors that can actually deploy the code. And yes, Daniel, isn't that also only contributors with GitHub accounts? Correct. Yeah. But core contributors, people contribute code to WordPress that doesn't necessarily make them a core contributor, which can actually affect WordPress core.
Is there this is a stupid question. Is there like one person or a like the small team, the leadership, like that vets this code? Like, I mean, you can't just like push it, right? I mean, obviously you can't just like,
that's
do we trust those people enough?
That's the core. That's at the end of the day, the buck stops at as far as I understand it, the buck stops at the core contributors, right? So testing, all that stuff happens. That's why I always say one of the best things to do is to see, when they're releasing a new version of WordPress, to actually watch that happen in Slack, because you get to see sort of like, I sort of attribute it to like watching a spaceship launch, right? All the checks and we're checking this and we're doing that, and okay, we're gonna everybody's checking and everybody's making sure there's no last errors when they're committing the code, to WordPress. They get to see all that stuff, right? Or you get to see all that stuff as like a somebody in the audience seeing this thing launch and everybody's checking in, and you really get to see, wow, there's a lot of people that partake in this. But you can even see it, like, again, back to the value of open source and version control. I know I'm bouncing around here a lot, but when you go and look at something like this is where, like, I'm not a developer, so this is why it's probably painful for developers in the audience. But if you look at something like add padding around selected values, author filter, you can come and see from a developer standpoint, performance test, you can see how all of this stuff affects the code, for lack of a better word. Like, was there an issue when the code was merged into a particular, version of WordPress? So like all of that stuff is being tracked in GitHub. So you can kind of see where things are failing and where the code is going, if that makes sense. And again, I'm not a developer. I just trust the process here, and I trust something like GitHub and version control, because that is all documented. So you can kind of see if there is a problem, you can go back and go, oh God, this is where this code got merged. We need to roll that back, or we need to pull that out, kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. What is track? Is track something different? We don't have to get into it. I was just high level, just something else.
Yeah. So track is just legacy. It's like legacy version control before
no
like GitHub
longer
existed. No, we use it. We still use it in WordPress. So track is where like all these issues happen in GitHub, and then there's like svn.wordpress. Let me pull it up.
Daniel has some strong opinions on SVN, apparently.
Let me tell you about SVN. Yeah, I mean, SVN, Mark, you're probably too young for this, but do you remember ever hearing about like MS-DOS? Like
Yes.
it's like that,
Oh, wow.
you know.
Interesting.
So so if we pull up this,
But it was the same concept then, but not
yeah, it's just it's been there
order.
since WordPress started, right? So I don't know if we go into something like this. It's just a very old. You can tell it's just a very old school setup. It just runs on WordPress.org. So this particular one is a track ticket, which is classified as a bug. Says filters on pattern archives, page not working, opened 13 hours ago, last modified 7 hours ago. Somebody says, here's the description. When you're on the patterns archive page, you want your filters sync or not sync pattern. The back office crash with this JS error. So this is obviously the code stuff happening. And then this person, I'm not even going to pretend to dissect this code, but this person replied with the issue.
So it's legacy and it's being used by people that don't use Git?
Yeah, but this is where all the core WordPress stuff happens. And WordPress themes. And plugins.
Because it's not on Git? Or just because it's legacy and you haven't moved, it hasn't moved or migrated?
It hasn't
or anything
moved,
like
and I believe it hasn't moved because what Courtney said, I think she said security by obscurity, because if there is some kind of huge security issue with WordPress, seemingly they don't want that to be on GitHub or accessible for anyone to either contribute or get access to it. So it stays with just the core contributors. And they mirror it, as Courtney also mentioned. It says it right here, to link a pull request to the ticket. So all that code is getting mirrored to GitHub so you can see it, but all the other discussions and access to contribute that code happens in track.
You have to be logged in to see that, I guess, in track?
No, I'm not logged in. This is all. You can go to core.track.wordpress to see it.
Okay.
And you get an RSS feed for it too, and you can see absolutely everything happening. So this covers everything under WordPress.org, which is a whole other discussion, which is WordPress.org itself, WordPress core, WordPress themes, like all the themes that are hosted at WordPress.org, all the plugins that are hosted at WordPress.org. Like this is where theme developers are still putting their themes and having the discussions of approval and what has to be changed and what needs to be updated. Like that whole community is in here, but all the WordPress core stuff also gets mirrored to GitHub. So you can see the code. You're just not gonna see all those discussions.
Okay. Do you think it's like important? Do you think it would be like beneficial to try to? I mean, I'm a little. I don't know if I'm just too young, not jaded by life just yet or something, but like the sentiment that like this just keeps happening, like it's just the way that it is. It's always been like this. It's always going to be like this. That type of thing. That doesn't ever really resonate with me. I find it to be like quite, like maybe it will end up being true, but I find it to be like quite like, I don't know, just maybe a sad way to think about things. Like, do we think like things could improve? Like it's almost seems like it's a sentiment that like you can't improve anything. Like it's just, this is just how it is.
I don't, it depends on what you mean by improve and like what that and at how much are you looking to improve all at once. I mean, obviously I'm not the one, with the answers or on the leadership side, but it's just like, what does improvement look like? Does it look like we're getting more features, not to like bricks versus WordPress core? Like, do we feel like that's an improvement? Like, oh, we're starting to satisfy those requirements that we get in bricks, and now we have that stuff in WordPress. Is that improvement? Is it improvement in the publishing side of it? Somebody on that call today brought up like, oh, the first thing I do is I disable all the screen options, like all the stuff that shows up on, I'm assuming he's talking about like WordPress dashboard and all the other stuff that pops up. Like, okay, how bad is that? Is like, is that all you want to get better? Is like that improve, like that onboarding experience? Like, is it the onboarding experience? Is it more themes? Like, what is it that people want? And I don't think that anyone can clearly answer that, because there's just such a vast amount of stuff that people want from WordPress. I don't know what improvement looks like. Is it clearer objectives? Is it more transparency with leadership? Is it those features we talked about? Like, what is it? Like, what is it going to make it better? Because I think my answer is I'm not unhappy, right? Like, I know I'm going to come off as an Automattic apologist, but I also say, like, step up other companies who are also making millions, if not billions of dollars off of this industry and contribute. I'm not worried about, I'm of the mindset of, like, I don't feel like it's that bad because we still have the products to be able to do things better. If you don't like Gutenberg, that's fine, but you have other options. Elementor, Bricks, Peterbilt, go ahead, pick something else.
I mean, I think the transparency aspect of it, which I'm not even blaming, I wouldn't even pass blame for the transparency. It's very hard to be transparent about so many different, like, the whole process of it. But my question would be, like, is that a core tenet of the whole project as a whole? And obviously, like, Matt Mullenweg's kind of the epicenter of progress, like Daniel said. And, like, a question because I'm new here. I don't know how long I can say that for, but question because I'm new here.
Yeah, you're gonna run out of that pretty soon.
Did he ever describe himself as a benevolent dictator, or was that something that was just because I hear that all the time? Like, did he say it was like that, or did somebody just, like, say that was how it was?
I think that was, and if anybody's in the audience that remembers this, I think that was tongue in cheek because he's really good friends with Tim Ferriss. And I want to say it was on Tim Ferriss's podcast where Tim labeled him the benevolent dictator. It might have been passed around before, or maybe he said it, but the first time I had heard it really was on the Tim Ferriss podcast. Courtney says it's used beyond WordPress. My mouse keeps dying for some reason.
Interesting.
I don't know why.
Okay. All right, so it's not like a foreign concept or whatever, and, like, he would probably, if you asked him, like, are you a benevolent dictator, he would say yes. I
would assume he would say yes. He probably, like, looks at you sideways, but
well, I'm just saying because I feel like I'm not the point where I'm, like, casting judgment or opinion necessarily, but I just feel like that, even something as silly as that, it's like everybody understanding that it's not a democracy and rather it's rather him moving it forward. If that is the case and everybody knew that, then at that point you could say, okay, well, I do or don't agree with that. But until we understand that is how it is, because still I think people are confused, apparently, that it's not a democracy. And it's not like, oh, I want something, I can just say it and it just happens, which is important to know. Like, we have to understand the parameters of what we're dealing with and like what the situation is before we can actually have an honest conversation and make any progress whatsoever, regardless of what your definition of progress is. So, yeah, and I would say, the only thing I would say, though, is, like, if that's the case, you line those up, it's like, I mean, I as an aside, maybe off topic, I find it, like, crazy that, like, 43% of the internet seems to be completely, like, at the mercy of one individual. Like, that's kind of, like, that seems a little concerning to me. Not like, again, nothing against Matt Mullenweg. Never spoke to the guy. Seen his interview, seems great. But I'm just saying, like, all of that, one person, epicenter of that, like, and we've talked about this before. Hopefully there's, like, kind of more of, like, we're understanding now that, like, time is a reality and, like, we're building kind of, like, some, contingency to that, like, with, troops and different things like that. And, like, kind of the, the seconds in command and stuff like that, which I don't know how much or how little that has happened in the past and everything. Because obviously when you're trying to run something big, you can't just do it alone. So I don't know. That's just, we don't have any answers there. I don't feel like, from what I've heard, it's just, we'll see what happens. But that's still something that's kind of like, I would just be curious about, like, how do we go about that? Not the next generation of users, the next generation of operators or, leadership even.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's something that people bring up a lot. And I think it almost sounds worse too. It sounds a lot more urgent when you frame it that way, like, oh, it's the whole 43%, this big number is reliant on him. It is, and it isn't, because it's like ideas, like he does set the motion forward, and he does allow for all of these automaticians to contribute to WordPress. But I think just like if you're, I don't know, if you have an idea for a movie and a movie starts getting made, like as a writer or as like the creator, like, okay, it's one thing to be like, here's the thing I want done, but then it's, again, it's this massive apparatus, and it changes and evolves over time, and it's out of your control unless you're just an absolute maniac narcissist and you're just like in everybody's face, which, you know, hey, it kind of sounds like he's still talking to all these people about all these products. Like he does need to maybe take a step back and hyper focus on the core of WordPress. But I think like his direction, there's one thing for like he sets the tone and the direction, but how it evolves, he's not like it's him writing the lines of code and the features are being built or whatever. Or maybe like even like Steve Jobs to a degree, I guess. You know, he has the ideas, this is the vision, but eventually like reality sets in and it has to be built a certain way, and it evolves just because there's so many people, you know, contributing to this thing that maybe his idea doesn't take shape exactly like he's wanted. And he's talked about it. Look at the data liberation initiative. That's just his idea. And until maybe he makes automaticians actually, you know, write these export, import, migration tools, he's just like, here's this idea for data liberation. Here's what we should do. And he just throws it out there. And now it's up to the community and anyone else who wants to contribute to that to actually make it reality. So what did he do? He sort of like put the carrot on the end of the stick a little bit closer. And he was just like, oh, if you want to make this plugin, I'll make a plugin to do something like this. I'll make sure it gets approved in 24 to 48 hours or whatever, which is, you know, contrary to like if you just have a plugin that you want to contribute to WordPress.org, it might take a month, 2 months, 3 months. I don't even know what the wait time is anymore for plugins. So his thing was like, I can help you get this done faster if you're contributing to this data liberation project, as an example.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, that totally makes sense. The example with the data liberation there, I would just be kind of literally interested, maybe just like literally ask him the question of like, how do you, to me, it's a little concerning, not concerning, but it's like, it's interesting that he, with that example, came up with data liberation. Seems like a great idea. Then nobody did anything with it. And then he had to dangle the carrot. And it's like, does he, as using that one as the one in question, is he going to have like a direction for that people are going to have to follow as well? And he's just getting it started, and then he's going to be like, okay, actually, this is kind of where I want you to go, something like that? Or is he much more hands-off than that? Because I've literally heard, like, again, without actually talking to him and hearing that specific stuff, I've heard kind of both ways. I've heard he's very, on, you know, like you said, on all the different companies, kind of like in there, like CEOs of different companies and stuff like that, very like hands-on with a lot of that stuff. But also at the same time, like, how could you possibly be hands-on with all this stuff? I mean, it's just too vast. So I don't know. I'm just curious genuinely about that as an example. But
I'm trying to just find something really quick.
Yeah.
What else? You see any chats coming in while I look for this? Anything that anyone's saying?
Yeah, I got one from Elliot Richmond. The plan is there is no plan. That's a fun one.
Damn it, Elliot.
That's a fun one. And then Peter says there's always forking. Classic Press exists. I'm not personally interested in it, but there is that. I mean, again, that's the beautiful part. I mean, again, I don't know. Maybe I'm just like kind of too meta for a lot of these conversations. I just literally think like, what happens if Matt Mullenweg literally just decided tomorrow that he wasn't going to do anything. I'm getting an echo.
Oh, you're hearing an echo right now?
Yeah, I was hearing myself.
All right, tell me if you hear this. Tell me if you hear this without you.
I have a little bit of a sad trombone one though.
Do you hear that? All right.
Yeah.
So I just need to turn that on for a second. Do you hear me? Do you hear me twice?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you just be quiet for a second. And I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this clip from the data liberation. This is from Matt Mullenweg's summer update at WordCamp Europe, talking specifically about the data liberation project.
Which is the data liberation project. So as I spoke about at State of the Word, I'll reintroduce data liberation. This is the idea that one of the best things we could do as an open source community is unlock all the proprietary platforms, all the places where people have their data logged in to systems which might not allow export or easy composability or transferability of their data. So we term this data liberation. And if you scan that QR code or go to wordpress.org/data-liberation, you will see we have the start of what hopefully will be something that creates a ton more freedom on the web and a ton more portability between platforms, including in and out of WordPress. WordPress could be maybe a middle ground between something else. However, this has had very, very little progress. So if you go to that page, click on some of the links. You'll see mostly empty GitHub repos. So I just wanted to point this out as an amazing place if you're interested in contributing to WordPress to adopt something and have total ownership of it. So if you want to each of these projects is fairly self-contained. So if you want a chance to actually lead something within the WordPress project, you could be in charge of the, say, Wix to WordPress converter or something like that. This, I think, is also going to be really important for us as the more and more marketing dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent in marketing for proprietary platforms. Proprietary platforms have gotten tons of investment in the past few years, things like Shopify, Squarespace, etc. And they are coming as sort of the macroeconomic conditions have changed. They've started to really target WordPress agencies, WordPress users, WordPress sites quite a bit. And so they're coming and trying to snipe away our community. So we have to keep an eye out for that. And the problem as well is when people go that way, it's almost impossible to go back the other way. It's like, I don't know if you had this advertisement here, but the Roach Motel, the roaches check in, they don't check out. That's a lot of these proprietary CMSs. They'll let you check in your data, but you can never check it out. So if part of our mission to democratize the web and increase freedom, I think it's really, really important that we create portability, even when the platforms themselves try not to allow it. The other big part of this that I think is also super relevant for this audience is we need to make WordPress to WordPress easier. Who's ever tried to transfer a WordPress site to something else or done an import?
All right, so I'm just going to stop it there. You should be good. I shut off loop back. Where this project, he came up with this idea, data liberation, and maybe other people talked about it. I mean, we've all always talked about making it easier to move from WordPress to WordPress for sure, from one web host to another web host. Moving your media from I just want my media to go to this WordPress website or whatever. So okay, so whether or not this is just a pet project, like understanding that Matt comes up with maybe a lot of pet projects as somebody in a more innovative leadership position should be doing, like taking bets and making these different things happen. That is how it started, at least the way that I understand it, with data liberation. Here's an idea. Here's why we need it to get done. And let's go build it. And by let's go build it, it's just, here it is, WordPress community, go and build this. Now, I think what's important to understand is that if you're a developer, like you have to get this is the challenge that a lot of us have with the community is we only see ourselves like website builders mostly. Like we're the most vocal, we're doing content marketing, we're on Twitter, LinkedIn, live streams, doing all this stuff. But there's a whole group of people much greater than the business side of WordPress who are developers, and somebody who wants to make a name for themselves, rightfully so. And you love the idea of open source, and you're a fantastic developer. And how do you shoulder your way up in a community where you want to give back to WordPress, but maybe you just don't have the podium or the stage that is there for you? What he said is, hey, you could be the person who makes the Wix to WordPress converter or whatever. Like you could be the person that leads that. And there's a certain allure there for somebody who wants to build that, right? Just like if WordPress was like, hey, we're doing an open call for podcasters for WordPress.org, I'd be like, yeah, I'll probably try to throw my hat into that ring. Like I'll try to create a story or an audio series about WordPress that I'll contribute to. And I would feel super passionate about that. There are people out there much greater and much more mass than us who would be like, yes, I want to write code in open source and give back to WordPress and be that person who made that Wix to WordPress converter. Because one, you either just love it, you love the idea of solving this issue, which I think a lot of developers are attracted to development in general, or you're trying to build up your resume and you want to get noticed. You want to get a job. You want to You want to be hired by Automattic. You want to be hired by some, web agency or some software company. And if you're the person who made their mark on the data liberation project and you are making Wix to WordPress so much better, yeah, you've just increased your chances to be maybe hired by Automattic or Wix, because Wix does have an open source division, air quotes, where they give back to their own open source projects as well. So it's also a calling card to the developers who are out there who want to contribute to this stuff. And I think we only see it from one lens. We're like, oh, that'll never happen. Who's going to do that? Well, somebody will eventually maybe step up, or if not, it doesn't, and it just dies out. And it really depends on Mullenweg whether or not he says, okay, no one wants to jump into this open source thing. I'll take 12 people from Automattic and make sure that they're contributing their time to data liberation.
Yeah, I mean, again, as far as the data liberation example goes, yeah, I don't know. What you laid out there makes sense. If you're a developer trying to make a name for themselves or whatever, then like those are the types of project. And Matt Mullenweg seems to be absolutely like a visionary and innovative guy as far as those things go. Again, I'd be interested to see like how much of he is super hands-on with versus just having the ideas and letting them kind of like naturally kind of flow. I'm sure there's examples of that in the past, and I'll be interested to see how it moves into the future. Just because I feel like everything's getting pretty big. There's a lot going on, so obviously just can't be reasonable amount of delegation. I feel like has to be continually made, and I'm sure he's doing a good bit of that.
So I'll sort of wrap up my side of it from call to action. Check out the live stream that Paul was supposed to host on his channel today. I'll paste that in the chat. If anybody else has any other questions, go ahead and drop them in now. Obviously a long conversation. The only thing that I really have a critical take on is if you're a content creator and you're somebody with an audience, that you should want to be meeting in the middle, right? Like it's not just good enough it's still impactful. I just think from my own point of view, like you have to try to meet in the middle and get the other person to cross aisle. And this goes on both sides, right? Like if you're an automatician, and again, we're seeing those efforts with Nick Diego and McCarthy, Rich Tabor's going on shows and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of listening coming from that side, but from the content creator side, I feel like it's detrimental that you understand this apparatus and that you also are, meeting in the middle and contributing more than just the content. I think if you're a thought leader, an influencer, a YouTuber, and you have the audience, that you have to go a step further, right? As a leader, in my opinion, just in my opinion. Check out the live stream today. It is still good discussion. It's making more people talk. So yes, there's a compound effect. There's a domino effect here. Check out the live stream discussion that I linked up. Again, it went on the Web Squadron channel. It was supposed to be Paul's channel. Yeah, check it out. It's a good conversation. And folks like Mark, who's on the stream today, does a series called Bridge Builders, Bridging the Gap. I'm not going to fill in what's the subheadline. I don't want to.
We do what we can. Yeah, it's Matt Eastwood's over on Matt Eastwood's channel. Me and Brendan O'Connell co-hosted with him, and yeah, we just look at different builders and different workflows and things like that, because I do think that is a tough thing. None of us have infinite hours in the day, so we can't all get to see the behind the scenes of how everything works, and then we just hear it via rumors from different content and things like that. Oh, this is great, this is terrible, and it's nice to see it, and we try to package it in a short stream, but it normally ends up being 2 to 3 hours. But just trying to give people different perspectives on stuff. Like I said, I don't have all the time in the world to look at all these different things, so it's cool to see it from professionals and that are using these different workflows, and just give us a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on the other things that we're not using every day. So, yeah.
Awesome stuff. Everybody else, thanks for joining the stream today. Thanks for hanging out, asking questions, throwing in your 2 cents, the WP Minute, thewpminute.com. Hey, you know what's happening tomorrow? Another live stream talking about another widely debated company, Elementor. What we're going to talk about is Elementor locking you in to... my mouse keeps dying. Is Elementor locking you into AI? You can join that conversation with me tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on this channel. Let me throw up the screen one more time. YouTube.com at WP Minute, joined by Ryan Logan, talking about his recent findings of Elementor. And can we shut off that pesky AI? Who's in control? We'll find out tomorrow on the live stream, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.